April 21st, 1775. British sailors are marching to the Powder House in Williamsburg, Virginia. The sailors arrive at the Powder House in the early morning. Working quickly, they make off with 15 half-barrels of the colony's gunpowder. The sailors begin making their way up Quarterpath Road to the James River, where the HMS Magdalen awaits them. However, while in transit, the British are discovered by the townspeople. They quickly sound the alarm, and soon militias begin forming. This is the Williamsburg Gunpowder Incident. The following content includes discussion of slavery, violence, and other related historical events. The material is presented to accurately portray the historical record and is not intended to endorse the actions or beliefs described. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. Thomas Jefferson. September 1st, 1774. Rumors begin to spread that the British have slaughtered 6 men in Charleston, Massachusetts, and stolen gunpowder and cannon from a local powder house. Though the rumors turned out to be mostly false, the thought that something like that could happen shook every colony to its core. Shortly after, on September 5th, 1774, the First Continental Congress would meet. Every colony, with the exception of Georgia, would convene to discuss the British treatment of American colonies. Delegates successfully organized an economic boycott of British goods, formally asserted colonial rights, and petitioned King George III for a redress of grievances. In early 1775, Virginian militias began to rearm and reorganize in response to the powder alarm in Massachusetts the year before. Militias began training regularly and raising money for ammunition and powder. As local militias prepare, Lord Dunmore, Royal Governor of Virginia, begins to worry. After Patrick Henry's Give Me Liberty or Give Me Death speech on March 23rd at the Second Virginia Convention, Lord Dunmore decides he needs to make his move. However, while Royal Navy ships remained in Chesapeake Bay, the British Army had been removed from Virginia after the events of September 1st, 1774. On April 19, 1775, Lord Dunmore orders Captain Henry Collins ashore with a company of sailors. Lord Dunmore quartered all the men in the governor's mansion until it was time for the operation. On April 21, 1775, Lord Dunmore sets the operation into effect. Captain Collins, along with his company, approach the Williamsburg powder house under the cover of night. They load 15 half-barrels of gunpowder into the governor's wagon and transport it down Quarterpath Road to the James River, where HMS Magdalen lies in wait. However, while the operation was still underway, the British were discovered by the townspeople. As dawn broke, alarms sounded through the town. Militias began forming and rallied around the governor's mansion. Lord Dunmore armed his servants with muskets to defend the mansion should they be attacked. As the crowd gathered, Patriot leaders struggled to keep the militias from storming the governor's mansion. However, they eventually succeeded in calming the angry mob. The city council demanded that Dunmore return the powder, as it was not the Crown's and it was the only way to defend themselves against wild animals and Native Americans. Lord Dunmore explains that he took the powder due to the likelihood of a slave uprising. This seemed to satisfy the crowd for the time being, and the militias began dispersing without violence. After Patriot leaders disperse a second mob on April 22nd, Lord Dunmore declares that if his mansion is attacked, he will set free the slaves and burn Williamsburg to the ground. On April 29th, the news of the battles of Lexington and Concord arrive in Virginia. The Fredericksburg Militia, about 80 miles northwest of Williamsburg, and led by George Washington, convened to discuss what to do about Lord Dunmore. A proposal is made for the 700 men of the militia to march on Williamsburg. It is put to a vote, and not marching narrowly wins. However, this was not so for other militias in the colony. One such militia was the Hanover County Militia, led by Patrick Henry on May 2nd. Before leaving with the main force, Henry sends a small detachment to the home of Richard Corbin, the deputy collector of royal revenue in Virginia. The rest of the militia began marching the nearly 15 miles to Williamsburg. The roughly 150 men arrive outside the town the next day on May 3rd. As they arrive, Carter Braxton, Richard Corbin's son-in-law, convinces Henry to let him go into town by himself to attempt to negotiate a payment. The same day, Dunmore fled to Portobello, his hunting lodge on the York River, and later to HMS Fowey, anchored in the York River. The next day, Henry received a bill of exchange for £330, around $90,000 US today. Afterwards, Henry began making his way to Philadelphia to take part in the Second Continental Congress. 2 days later, on May 6th, Dunmore charged Henry with extortion of the £330. Lord Dunmore returned to Williamsburg on May 12th and began trying to repair some relations with the colony. However, on the late night of June 3rd or early morning of June 4th, 2 young men were injured trying to break into the powder house. The powder house had been booby-trapped in lieu of recent events, and the pair had set off a spring gun in an attempt to get in. The colony was outraged and began to blame Lord Dunmore for the pair's injuries. On June 8th, in the middle of the night, Lord Dunmore fled once again to HMS Fowey. After his flight, many colonies rejected the conciliatory resolution before its formal rejection at the Second Continental Congress on July 31, 1775. Lord Dunmore attempted on several occasions to retake the colony of Virginia. However, after his defeat at the Battle of Great Bridge on December 9, 1775, he was reduced to little more than raiding parties. Dunmore was forced to completely abandon the colony after his defeat at the Battle of Gwynn's Island on July 8 through 10, 1776. Virginia's government was taken over by the Committee of Safety, and on July 5, 1776, Patrick Henry would be elected the first governor of Virginia. This was the Williamsburg Gunpowder Incident. As always, if you notice any mistakes or have suggestions for new content, please let us know in the comments below. This is Every Battle Fought.